When Brigan the Deft ascended the throne, the financial state of the kingdom was poor, very poor, powerless in fact. Now Brigan was an ambitious man, and he wanted to make his mark. Unfortunately, to keep the crown safe on his head, he had to please the better off, and some of the peasantry. Well, he thought to himself, what was needed was a massive program of flashy buildings, gaudy public office towers, light rail and a few circuses. Not all useful, but good visible crowd pleasers. Well, he got onto it, and a building boom was underway in no time flat. The trouble with flash public works was, well, they were costly, flaming costly. He needed money. All kings need money. It's a fact of life. So he had a swift look around. Straw. There seemed to be straw everywhere. In the shoes of the peasants, under the backsides of pigs, on roofs, in byres, in the fields. It's too easy, he thought, and whacked a bloody great tax on straw. The tax take wasn't enough. He needed more money. So he got crafty and levelled a capital gains tax on every little capital gain that any of his subjects got from anywhere. Well, that caused a right stink. The good burghers and burgesses, them what made the capital gains, tried to avoid assessed gains on their assets in all sorts of silly ways. They even tried hiding their wives' jewels and pigsties and such like. But the capital gains tax took in a fair sum, for a while. Alas, too soon the buildings were completed and full of all the expensive pension-draining, salary-seeking civil servants he needed to run all the welfare schemes and manage all his monument building. There still wasn't enough liquidity in the system, as economic advisers told him. It looked like progress, but fooled nobody. If he had more tax, he thought, he could do more things to impress the peasants and the nobility and get some readies back into the system. Staging mass games, maybe, stadiums, circuses, light rail, flashy stuff. He found the peasants were squirreling away small sacks of pennies, trying desperately to set their children up in business, clothe themselves, drink occasionally, and eat better food than the state-provided swill. Well, if the bloody citizens had money saved up, all that meant was he'd not got to it first with sound taxation. So he taxed savings. The savings tax was good, and he fairly soon drained the kingdom of any loose savings. And so things were fairly boosted along with festivals, assorted carnivals and circuses, film festivals, and all that sort of burger-pleasing stuff. But there was merriment and riotous drinking binges, which all unfortunately had to be paid for. But the savings were soon gone, and with them the taxes. He paid for the festivals by increasing the tax on the peasants' ale. Oh, a brilliant tactic. It staved off complaints from the wives about drinking. But in no time the churlish peasants huddled in the taverns all night, drinking hardly anything. The rich kept on drinking fancy bottled ale from abroad, and the peasants started gambling. He sorted that out by taxing all forms of wagering, gambling, and he nationalised the national numbers racket, called it lotto, and made sure that no peasant could walk more than 50 yards without an opportunity to gamble. It drained the peasants of their last few pennies, but it was not enough to get the royal coffers full enough so he could do something really big. Then he stumbled onto a good strategy to raise his standing and stop the peasants and the snobby elite from moaning and whinging day in and day out. He would threaten a particular tax, say a window tax or a tax on gossip. Then after a lot of belly-aching and more whinging, he would cancel it. The subjects were so grateful. He was a kind of hero for a while, stopping the taxes he threatened to make. But he ran out of idea for threatened taxes, and they fell back to whining. Speed taxes followed to keep the roads safe, he explained. It was an unrelenting struggle. Tax collectors terrorised the countryside, hiding behind trees to collect the speed tax. He taxed parking, even when there were lots of car parks around the city. Still, the aggregate demand fell. For some damn reason, people were not spending. He could tell by spot checks on bankers and stripping naked the big spenders in the marketplace that some people still had money. Spot checks led, of course, to spot fines, and spot taxes were introduced for spitting, squinting, squirming, smoking, and excessive blinking. The taxes flowed in, for a while, but not for long. I'm not taking this taxes seriously enough, he thought. So he taxed the selling of houses and instituted a land tax. And to keep exports up and please the merchants, he paid a bounty on exports. It was nice to have one section of the community happy. But he needed tax to pay the bounty, so he taxed imports into the kingdom. This unfortunately raised prices beyond the reach of the peasantry. But now, to get anything benefit out of the tax system, the peasants had to get fatally ill and get in a few cheap hospital meals before death. The rich got good value, of course, by sending their children into higher education to become lawyers and fleecing the peasants at the expense of the Treasury for the free legal advice scheme. To stop the farmers moaning louder than farmers usually do, they got their hay for their oxen, heavily subsidised. They said that farming didn't pay without subsidies. Brigan sarcastically suggested to take up some economically less draining business like basket weaving. But the sarcasm went right over their heads. Some did a little basket weaving on the side, thinking it was a sound notion. To pay the subsidy on basket weaving, he put a tax on the sale of every cart or house. And the employers complained they had no money to pay people anymore, and Brigan had to spend fortunes on job creation schemes that, for some reason, didn't work. Indeed, for some reason, beggary and joblessness increased. Spend more money, said the economic advisers. All academics without a whit of business experience, he noted. You must increase aggregate demand, they said. But to spend it, you had to get it. The kingdom was already in debt right up to the tip-top tippy bit of his crown. He instituted a tax on anybody who hired anybody to give them the money to finance the employment package. And he taxed entertainment, the sale of goods from warehouses, and money in the bank. And of course, next to their hovels, cart horses and bad habits, the only other assets the peasants had was, well, their beds. So he immediately taxed them. The bloody peasants got shifty, and there was massive bed crowding, as many as 10 in a bed. He taxed the numbers in beds, but during the nightly inspections, indignant visitors roused from their slumbers where we were discovered to be sleeping with the wrong people. Some of the scandals were horrific. Finally, to save a lot of bother, he added a general state tax on everything that moved, breathed, flew, or walked, or in any way existed. He got a bunch of money out of that one, but there was still no surge in spending in the economy. Peasants led tearful delegations to him, pleading to see their money for a few short hours on payday before it was plucked from their grasp. He refused, explaining if they kept it too long, they might get attached to it and forget to whom it rightfully belonged. Then, one dark and stormy night, there was a most unfortunate accident. The east wing of the castle fell into the cesspit, and Brigan the Deft and all his advisers were drowned, and all the tax records were lost. That's right. All the records of all the kinds of taxes and who owed them were lost, every single one. And then Brendan the Bright came to power, and he was bright. Oh, he was a very bright young man, and more than that, a very realistic young man. He figured rightly that the peasants would lie blind that they had paid their tax. Check the records, these smarty-britched larts would say, and they knew he couldn't. There were just so many taxes, hundreds of them, and what with the records destroyed, no one could remember just what needed to be collected, and when, and from whom. And Brendan figured he wouldn't see a penny for ages, but he was bright, and he knew he had to get a few pennies into the treasury soon. So he abolished all the previous taxes. If he couldn't collect them, why bother? He demanded a single low tax from everybody right now. The effect was astonishing. People who'd spent most of their time avoiding the rapacious tax gatherers surprised everybody and paid up. More taxpayers were suddenly found in all sorts of interesting places, occupations and trades that had not seen the light of the fiscal office before now. And all of a sudden, with low taxes, the peasants had money in their pockets. They had money. And they bought luxuries like food, beds, a second set of clothes, more oxen, houses. The merchants and retailers were flooded with money. There was a hell of a rush on employing people to meet the aggregated demand. The bed makers and clothing makers and barbers had to smarten up their act to make all these goods and supply all these services. The people had money and they had needs. So nobody was on the dole. There was jobs for everyone. The money just multiplied as if by magic. And when the demand for the new buildings rose, well, the investors had money out of their own to build them. People could afford houses on ordinary wages. The peasants were overjoyed and drank much of the newly cheap ale. Unfortunately, not as much as they would like to drink, because they all had jobs to go to in the morning. With all this economic activity, the tax increased monumentally, and there was more money for health and education for all. Brigan believed these were good investments. The peasants were happy, even when they were sober. And at last, the whinging and whining finally stopped.